10 countries and cities President Biden's insane motorcade visited in 2022. Here's a summary of U.S. President Joe Biden's world tour and all the countries and cities he visited in 2022. President Biden's arrive in London for Queen's funeral. Joe Biden and his wife Jill arrived in the UK on Saturday to attend the funeral of Queen Elizabeth, who the U.S. president has described as more than a monarch, and a woman who defined an era. The Queen's state funeral was attended by almost 100 presidents and heads of government, and the Bidens were traveling without any former U.S. presidents. The Bidens arrived in Air Force One at London Stansted Airport just before 10 p.m. local time, 5 p.m. Eastern Time on June 2021. The president paid his respects to the late sovereign, whose coffin was lying in Westminster Hall. Afterwards, the Bidens signed an official condolence book before attending a reception where they met with King Charles. The White House had said earlier this week that the royal invitation to the funeral, which takes place at Westminster Abbey, was for the Bidens only. However, other members of the president's entourage who attended includes the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, Deputy Chief of Staff, Jen O'Malley-Dillon, and Director of Oval Office Operations, Annie Tomasini. Ahead of the funeral, world leaders were advised against using their own vehicles and had been asked to use commercial flights and will be shuttled to the funeral venues via buses. However, the travel protocol did not apply to the Bidens. The president and his wife arrived at the funeral in the Beast, the president's own armored car. The Queen, who died on the 8th of September after a 70-year reign, had met multiple U.S. presidents, including Donald Trump, Barack Obama and George W. Bush. She met 13 of the last 14 American presidents, all except Lyndon Johnson and starting with Harry Truman in 1951 when she was still a princess. President Biden's arrive in Israel. U.S. President Joe Biden arrived in Israel for a 2-day visit. This is Biden's 10th visit to Israel since 1973 and his first since taking office in January 2021. Air Force One landed at Ben Gurion International Airport. Stepping off the plane, the American president was received with a full state ceremony by President Isaac Herzog, Prime Minister Yair Lapid, and Prime Minister-designate Naftali Bennett. Israel's top diplomatic corps, including all government ministers, was present at the ceremony as well. Herzog delivered the first remarks on the tarmac, saying, "Welcome our brother Joseph, welcome to Israel and welcome home." He added, "You have been a true friend, and staunch supporter of Israel and the Jewish people, of our security and well-being, your entire life. In this visit, you will discuss the security challenges emanating directly from Iran and its proxies." Lapid then delivered his speech and said, "Baruch haba, welcome to Israel," using the Hebrew expression to express welcome, going on to describe the significance of the visit. The historic visit expressed the unbreakable bond between the two countries. The nations share values on democracy, freedom, and the right of the Jewish people to a state of their own, Lapid said. It is also a personal visit, because Biden's relationship with Israel has always been personal. Biden defined himself as a Zionist. Biden mentioned that you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. Lapid commented that Biden was a great Zionist and one of the best friends Israel has ever known. Biden also talked about his first visit in Israel in 1973, as a young senator, saying it was a great honor to be a living part of history. President Biden arrives in Saudi Arabia. U.S. President Joe Biden arrived in Saudi Arabia on Friday from Israel, for his first visit to the kingdom since taking office last year. Biden was welcomed at King Abdulaziz International Airport in Jeddah by Emir of Mecca region, Khalid Al Faisal. The U.S. president also met with Saudi King Salman and his Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman during his 2-day visit to the kingdom. During his visit, Biden urged the Saudi government to ramp up oil production in a bid to rein in soaring costs, which in part drove U.S. inflation to a 4-decade high of 9.1% in June ahead of crucial midterm elections in November. Critical discussion revolved around the allegation from the U.S. intelligence community that the Crown Prince, Saudi Arabia's de facto leader, directly ordered the 2018 murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The Saudi government has repeatedly rejected the accusation. President Biden arrives in Egypt. Biden was received by Minister of Planning and Economic Development Hala El Saeed at Sharm el-Sheikh Airport. Shortly later he met with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. The U.S. President Joe Biden thanked Egypt for playing the mediating role in Gaza developments and hoped that relations with Egypt will be stronger by the end of his visit. Biden also thanked Egypt for speaking firmly regarding the Russian-Ukrainian war and playing such a vital role in this regard. Biden headed to the headquarters of the UN Climate Summit, according to the official Nile channel. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said, the president departed for Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, where he participated in the COP27 climate conference and held a bilateral meeting with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. After the COP27 summit, Biden will head to Phnom Penh, Cambodia to participate in the annual U.S. ASEAN Summit and the East Asia Summit. President Biden arrives in Cambodia. The U.S. President's official plane, Air Force One, touched down at Phnom Penh International Airport, and the president's motorcade traveled along the currently closed-off Russian Boulevard into Phnom Penh. President Joe Biden reiterated the U.S. partnership with Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN countries as the heart of his administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, as he sought to counter China's growing influence ahead of a high-stakes meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. President Joe Biden underscored the U.S. partnership with Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN countries on Saturday as the heart of my administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, as he seeks to counter China's growing influence ahead of a high-stakes meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping set for Monday. The weekend of meetings in Cambodia came ahead of the highly anticipated Group of 20 summit in Indonesia, where Biden met with Xi for the first time in person since he took office. Cambodia's visit gave POTUS a chance to speak with U.S. allies before sitting down with Xi. The visit tackled the biggest issues of our time, from climate to health security, defend against the significant threats to rule-based order and to threats to the rule of law, and to build an Indo-Pacific that's free and open, stable and prosperous, resilient and secure. This was his third trip, his third summit, second in person. The president's first order of business in Cambodia was a bilateral meeting with Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen. President Biden arrives in Indonesia. U.S. President Joe Biden landed in Bali, Indonesia, for the summit of the G20 group of major economies. Biden, who arrived off the back of his attendance at the COP27 climate summit in Egypt and the ASEAN summit in Cambodia, met Chinese President Xi Jinping and other leaders to address a range of geopolitical issues, including the war in Ukraine, tensions in the Taiwan Strait and the ongoing food, energy and climate crises. He arrived for a G20 summit on the Indonesian island, his third major summit in around the world foreign policy blast. He was greeted by pink and gold-shrouded performers who put on a traditional dance of welcome. Observers said the meeting was more like Cold War-era summits between the Soviet Union and the U.S., a high-stakes summit on neutral territory where both sides simply want to try to understand the red lines. President Biden arrives at the Vatican City. Pope Francis met Joe Biden in the U.S. president's first official visit to the Vatican since his inauguration. Biden, the second Catholic president in U.S. history, was in Rome to attend the G20 summit. The president arrived at the Vatican's San Damaso courtyard after his motorcade entered the Vatican through an arch to the left of the entrance of St. Peter's Basilica. The encounter was Biden's fourth time meeting Pope Francis, but his first as president. According to a brief Vatican statement, Pope Francis and Biden met privately in the Pope's library for around 75 minutes. Pope Francis previously met Biden in 2015, during his visit to the U.S., when Biden was vice president. The next year, the two men exchanged a greeting during a Vatican conference on regenerative medicine, at which Biden spoke. Biden also met Francis at his papal inauguration in March 2013. President Biden arrives in Poland. U.S. President Joe Biden arrived in Poland Friday to see firsthand how the country is coping with the large numbers of refugees fleeing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Biden landed in the southeastern city of Rzeszów, about 70 kilometers (45 miles) from the Ukrainian border. The president's first stop was to meet members of the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division, which is serving alongside Polish troops. He was then briefed by aid agencies on the humanitarian response to the conflict in Ukraine. En route to Poland on Air Force One, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said NATO countries were conducting contingency planning for the possibility that Russia chooses to strike NATO territory. Biden said he wanted to visit Poland to underscore that the assistance it is providing is of enormous consequence, as Europe experiences the biggest refugee crisis since World War II. President Biden arrives in Spain. President Joe Biden arrived in Spain to meet with fellow leaders of NATO with plans to beef up the American presence in Europe at a moment of growing concern about the alliance's resolve in the face of the grinding war in Ukraine. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that Biden detailed the plan to increase the number of Navy destroyers based in Rota, Spain, from 4 to 6 after talks with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez. Sullivan said the move was one of multiple arrangements that Biden and NATO allies made to help bolster the alliance in the region. Sullivan said that the Rota move would help increase the United States and NATO's maritime presence. President Biden arrived in Belgium. U.S. President Joe Biden arrived in Brussels where he met with NATO and European allies and announced a new round of sanctions against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. He joined NATO partners in imposing further sanctions on Russia and tightening the existing sanctions to crack down on evasion and to ensure robust enforcement. At a news conference Wednesday in Brussels, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said Russia's war on Ukraine presents a new normal for Europe's security. The leaders agreed to strengthen NATO's posture in all domains with major increases of forces in the eastern part of the alliance, on land, in the air and at sea. According to Stoltenberg, the first step was the deployment of 4 new NATO battle groups in Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania and Slovakia. The alliance chief said NATO leaders are also set to announce an agreement to address nuclear, chemical and other threats from Russia. Leaders agreed to provide additional support, including cybersecurity assistance as well as equipment to help Ukraine protect against chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear threats.